Our ability to deceive ourselves is so great that it is almost beyond comprehension. It's as if we decided that the looming disasters that we face are too much trouble to think about, much less talk about, or even do anything to avoid. We won't even talk about these things, and I'm utterly amazed by this. And since we keep our mouths closed, our choice to be blind spreads like a disease. Unfortunately, it's not a disease, it's a choice. We chose this, and I wouldn't believe it if I didn't see it in myself. Yesterday, as I was writing my article on Friday, I was creating little graphics for my cell phone so that I could show the local pharmacist the medications that I needed. Some of what I was looking for was very specific, and Mrs. Little isn't as familiar with what I need, especially since I tend to be so self-sufficient. It is rare that she needs to know these things so that she can translate them into Chinese. But I'm afraid that I've hit my normal limits of self-sufficiency here in Tainan. And some things just don't translate into Chinese very easily. Taipei is a whole lot easier for the linguistically challenged expat to navigate. Up there, I could normally find someone with enough English to get me what I needed. Not so much down here. So I got the brilliant idea of creating little electronic images to show the pharmacist what I was looking for. All of this was pretty straightforward until I started looking for antacid. Wait, A-N-T-I-A-C-I-D isn't the right spelling? No, it isn't. It's antacid, not antacid. But it seems that every time that I saw a container labeled antacid, my mind would convert the word to antiacid. And my mind has been doing this for more than 30 years. I'm sure that there were moments of confusion where my mind would actually see the word as it was printed, but they were obviously not profound enough moments for me to remember them. The point is that I was blind to the word antacid. Part of the reason is that the word just doesn't make sense to me. Acid, the acid produced by ants, is actually formic acid, and you do not want that if your stomach has produced too much of its own acid. What a stupid way to spell something that is used to neutralize stomach acid, and not ants. But the word is about 300 years old, so we're stuck with it. But I'm still a bit put out by all this. And it's going to take a lot of work on my part to get me to stop putting an extra I in that word. The point is that I was willfully blind. I had decided that the I belonged in that word, and it was going to remain in that word no matter what other people said. And I'm not certain how conscious I was of this decision. I just decided, and that was it. I'm also really stubborn, as Mrs. Little knows, so that's part of the problem. It doesn't matter how many people think that something is a good idea. If I don't, it isn't, period. Do you remember that joke about a billion Chinese can't be wrong? Yeah, well, I'm awfully close to those billion Chinese, so I don't tell that joke anymore. And I'm stubborn enough to disagree with a lot more than just a billion Chinese. Oh, and Mrs. Little is so disgustingly healthy that she's never had to deal with such things as I have. The disturbing thing is the ease with which I did this, and it makes me wonder about what else I'm editing out of my awareness, and I'm curious about what God will show me when this life is over, about the things that I deliberately ignored. The good thing is that I'm married to someone who is willing to point out what I'm ignoring, so I'm probably not ignoring too much that I shouldn't. The problem is that most of you are ignoring what you shouldn't, and as I sat down to write what I wrote on Friday, I ran into a gigantic example of this that I wrote about 5.5 years ago. Quote, 85% of you know there is a problem. 85%, that's a big number, really big, and I can bet only one of that 85% is actually doing anything about it. 85%. That verdict is of a video that I just watched. The 1 in 85 is my own contribution. I understand the fear that keeps you inactive. Our societies punish those who stand up and point out problems. No one likes a person who disrupts the rhythm of life. No one likes the little boy who exclaims that the emperor has no clothes. But knowledge brings responsibility. If you see a danger to your family or community and say nothing, then you are also responsible for what happens to them. Close quote. From some guy named John Little, myself, who wrote an article also called Willful Blindness way back in 2000 and, well, who knows how long ago, but I think it was 2013. The reason why, in fact, actually it is 2013. The reason why I said 85% is due to this video that was in the piece that I wrote in 2013. And it's a TEDx video titled The Dangers of Willful Blindness, done by Margaret Heffernan. If you have trouble with that link, and I do provide it in the newsletter, you can also find it at Margaret Heffernan, The Dangers of Willful Blindness. I watched that video again and I'm still struck by how similar the situation in Libby, Montana was to what we are all experiencing right now. Here's the first paragraph of the YouTube description of this video. Quote, Gayla Benefield was just doing her job until she uncovered an awful secret about her hometown. That meant its mortality rate was 80 times higher than anywhere else in the United States. But when she tried to tell people about it, she learned an even more shocking truth. People didn't want to know. In a talk that's part history lesson, part call to action, Margaret Heffernan demonstrates the danger of willful blindness and praises ordinary people like Benefield, who are willing to speak up. And it was filmed at TEDx Danubia. Take a good hard look at the main point. Quote, people didn't want to know, close quote. Yet, and here's the thing that drives me nuts, 85% of that town knew what the problem was and knew that it was true. And that's an utterly maddening statistic. They knew, but at the same time, they were refusing to know. They were willfully blind. We have a popular proverb that goes like this, quote, there are none so blind as those who will not see, close quote, from John Haywood in 1546, almost 500, almost 500 years ago, sorry. And it appears that John was paraphrasing poor Jeremiah. Quote, hear now this, O foolish people, and without understanding, which have eyes and see not, which have ears and hear not. Close quote. Jeremiah 5:21. The reason why I say poor Jeremiah was that Jeremiah was doing his very best to point out the obvious. But the people that he loved and desperately wished to save would not hear. They refused to see the obvious. It was utterly maddening to poor Jeremiah. It didn't matter how much evidence that he put in front of his people. They refused to see what they did not want to see. And even after the destruction that Jerusalem suffered, Yochanan ben Kareah and the survivors still refused to believe Jeremiah, even though he had been proven right every time before. Poor Jeremiah. Poor Jeremiah must have been tearing his hair out. How utterly maddening. I would have hated to have been in his... Wait. I am in his position. You are too. Those of you who see what's coming are warning others. You are in the exact same position that poor Jeremiah was, and you get to tear your hair out just like he did. Judgment is coming. In fact, it's already at the walls and knocking down the gates. It cannot be avoided. It can only be prepared for. And you are required by God to sound the alarm. You are not allowed to keep silent. The question is, what are you doing to sound the alarm? I know that this sounds like an unreasonable question to ask of you. But is there anyone else that I can ask? Is there anyone else who knows the truth that I can ask to help? Here, let me quote myself from last week. Quote, If you see someone heading down a road that will get them killed, you have a God-given responsibility to warn them. And if you do not, God will ask you why when you stand before his throne after this life is over. In fact, there's a verse that has propelled me forward for a very long time. Quote, "When I say unto the wicked, thou shalt surely die, and thou givest him not warning, nor speakest to warn the wicked from his wicked way, to save his life, the same wicked man shall die in his iniquity, but his blood will I require at thine hand." Close quote. Ezekiel 3:18. So think of that as a kind of backup reason for why I need to keep yelling at the top of my lungs that disaster is coming. If I do not warn you of the danger that you're in, any harm that you receive will be laid at my feet. And make no mistake on this, what God said to Ezekiel applies to me and to you. Since I have given you this warning, it is your responsibility to pick up that warning and pass it on to others. If you do not, any harm that others suffer because you did not warn them will be on your hands. And when you stand before God after this life is over, he will ask you why you did not pass the warning on. God will one day point out the great suffering that could have been avoided because you said nothing. Close quote. There are some who will listen, just as there were some who listened to Jeremiah. Those who listened to Jeremiah did what God asked them to do, which was to volunteer to go into captivity, to surrender to the Babylonians. Those who obeyed survived. Those who did not, didn't. Poor Jeremiah didn't ask for the job that God gave him, but he was born for the job. Then we can say the same for ourselves. To paraphrase what Mordecai said to Esther, we were born for such a time as this.